before Aristotle.
Alrighty.
In a way, this has come to take the place of God. But some philosophical problems remain as troubling as ever. Take the problem of free will. This problem's been around for a long time, since before Aristotle, in 350 BC. St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, these guys all worried about how we can be free if God already knows in advance everything you're going to do. Nowadays, we know that the world operates according to some fundamental physical laws. And these laws govern the behavior of every object in the world. Now, these laws, because they're so trustworthy, they enable incredible technological achievements. But look at yourself. We're just physical systems too, right? We're just complex arrangements of carbon molecules. We're mostly water. And our behavior isn't going to be an exception to these basic physical laws. So it starts to look like whether it's God setting things up in advance and knowing everything you're going to do, or whether it's these basic physical laws governing everything, there's not a lot of room left for freedom. So now you might be tempted to just ignore the question, ignore the mystery of free will. Say, oh, well, it's just a historical anecdote, it's sophomoric, it's a question with no answer, just forget about it. But the question keeps staring you right in the face. Think about individuality, for example, who you are. Who you are is mostly a matter of the free choices that you make. Or take responsibility. You can only be held responsible, you can only be found guilty, or you can only be admired or respected for things you did of your own free will. So the question keeps coming back, and we don't really have a solution to it. It starts to look like all your decisions are really just a charade. Think about how it happens. There's some electrical activity in your brain, your neurons fire, they send a signal down into your nervous system, it passes along down into your muscle fibers, they twitch. You might, say, reach out your arm. Looks like it's a free action on your part, but every one of those, every part of that process is actually governed by physical law, chemical laws, electrical laws, and so on. So now it starts to look like the Big Bang set up the initial conditions, and the whole rest of our history, the whole rest of human history and even before, is really just sort of the playing out of subatomic particles according to these basic fundamental physical laws. We think we're special. We think we have some kind of special dignity. But that now comes under threat. I mean, that's really challenged by this picture. So you might be saying, well, wait a minute, what about quantum mechanics? I know enough contemporary physical theory to know it's not really like that. It's really a probabilistic theory. There's room, it's loose, it's not deterministic. And that's going to enable us to understand free will. But if you look at the details, it's not really going to help, because what happens is you have some very small quantum particles, and their behavior is apparently a bit random. They sort of swerve. Their behavior is absurd in the sense that it's unpredictable, and we can't understand it based on anything that came before. It just does something out of the blue according to a probabilistic framework. But is that going to help with freedom? I mean, should our freedom just be a matter of probabilities, just some random swerving in a chaotic system? That starts to seem like it's worse. I'd rather be a gear in a big deterministic physical machine than just some random swerving. So we can't just ignore the problem. We have to find room in our contemporary worldview for
Alright.
Just a little fun video. So that's basically the argument from physics. Free will doesn't make sense in a classical determinist sense or a quantum mechanical random sense. There's no room. To have free will means we must adopt some kind of Cartesian dualism, where the mind or soul floats free from the natural world. It can suddenly impose its will on the physical without any kind of antecedent. Now, there's an argument from psychology that comes from the idea of the unconscious, that we're largely unaware of our beliefs and desires that drive our actions and our choices. This idea was touched upon by Spinoza, who I mentioned, who wrote again, men believe themselves to be free simply because they're conscious of their actions and unconscious of the causes whereby those actions are determined. The more damning argument, I think, comes from neurology, which has shown that our decisions are preceded by neural activity. Our conscious awareness of making a choice comes after the brain activity which causes this choice. Rosenblum mentions the famous account of this in Benjamin Libet's studies of the 1980s, where they found a readiness potential or an electric spike a fraction of a second before the conscious awareness of the choice. Therefore, the choice, there's an evidence of a choice being made before the person is aware of even thinking that they've made a choice. Unfortunately, this doesn't convince Rosenblum, but fortunately, at least for me, there's been research since then, which is even more convincing. As recent as April of 2008, there was an article published in Nature Neuroscience called Unconscious Determinants of Free Decisions in the Human Brain, where they found, quote, the outcome of a decision can be encoded in brain activity of the prefrontal and parietal cortex up to 10 seconds before it enters awareness. 10 seconds. If you count out 10 seconds before a choice, that's an absurdly long amount of time for someone to know what choice you're going to make 10 seconds ahead of time. And in the realm of subatomic particles, that's an extremely long amount of time. So in modern neuroscience, our behaviors are known to be rooted in our biology, specifically the processes of the nervous system. Again, the notion of free will presupposes that there exists an agent whose choices and behaviors are uncaused and undetermined. They're just free actions. Even further, according to the philosopher and neuroscientist Patricia Churchland, current research shows that, quote, the brain does indeed appear to be a causal machine. So far, there is no evidence at all that some neuronal events happen without any cause. Importantly, even were uncaused neuronal events to be discovered, it is a further substantial matter to show precisely those events constitute choice. From a biological perspective, there doesn't appear to be any room for free will. Rosenblum even admits as much when he begins the quotation that I mentioned a while ago with the phrase, though it is hard to fit free will into a scientific worldview, etc. If free will is hard to fit into a scientific worldview, and, quote, the existence of a quantum enigma depends crucially on free will, wouldn't it seem practical to devote little more than 2 pages to the discussion of free will? Wouldn't it be necessary to understand the views of biologists, psychologists, neurologists, and philosophers on these issues of consciousness and free will to have a full, accurate scientific picture of the situation? It makes little sense for us to think that human free will is somehow the one uncaused phenomenon in the entire universe. The uniqueness of humans, or their supposed uniqueness, is counted on in the book Quantum Enigma, where somehow human free will has a special place in the world that supposedly produces a new quantum enigma. When Rosenblum shows you this box experiment, which I predict he will, just think to yourself, couldn't a robot do this? Why does free will even need to enter the picture? Where does consciousness enter the picture? I'd like to close with a group of 4 quotations from four different physicists. The first is John Wheeler. He writes, caution, consciousness has nothing whatsoever to do with the quantum process. We are dealing with an event that makes itself known by an irreversible act of amplification, by an indelible record, an act of registration. Does that record subsequently enter into the consciousness of some person, animal, or computer? Is that the first step into translating measurement into meaning regarded as the joint product of all the evidence that is available to those who communicate? Then that's a separate part of the story, important but not to be confused with quantum phenomena. Werner von Heisenberg wrote, certainly quantum theory does not contain genuine subjective features. It does not introduce the mind of the physicist as part of the atomic event. John Bell wrote, I think the experimental facts which are usually offered to show that we must bring the observer into quantum theory do not compel us to adopt that conclusion. And finally, Richard Feynman wrote, nature doesn't know what you're looking at, and she behaves the way she's going to behave whether you bother to take down the data or not. Thanks.
Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Now we'll listen to Cruz.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ben. I'm going to use an old-fashioned kind of thing. Turn off that projector.
Sure. That's all you needed. It's the software too. I guess it doesn't.
Excuse me. Let me first thank Ben for suggesting this debate. I jump at the opportunity at any time to talk about the quantum enigma. And let me just, for fun, say, how many people here are physics majors? Oh, most. Oh, wow. Okay, good. I like physics majors. I like other people too, but